Hey everyone, so today we're going to be using the follower modifier on the text plus node to get an effect like you're seeing here. The documentation for the follower modifier is pretty much non-existent. It's a very frustrating tool to use. I've had a lot of troubles with it. I imagine a lot of people are having some of the same issues with it. So I've tried to just break things down, go through things pretty slowly and pretty carefully to explain how this modifier works. It's a pretty cool tool if you can get it to behave properly. You probably will experience a bit of frustration in getting there though. So let's go through this together and we'll see what we can come up with. So what a follower is essentially is you set up an animation on a single character in a text node and you'll have an effect like you see on the screen here, where you can set up a delay between how that animation is applied to all these different characters. And there's a whole host of options that we can get into. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's get started here. So I'm in the cut page in a fresh project. I'm going to click on titles and I'm going to grab a text plus node. I'm going to drag that down to our timeline and release. And we're going to head right over to Fusion. So all our work is going to be done in Fusion. So here we are in our node editor. Just a couple quick house cleaning tips before we get going. So right now I can move this anywhere I want. I don't really like that. I'd prefer to be snapped to a grid. So I can come here, I can go Arrange Tools, and I can select two grids. So anytime I move my nodes now, I'm snapped into a grid. I really like that. That's nice and handy. Another thing that we can change is, if you notice here, this diagonal connection between these two nodes here. If I come click on this gray space over here, I can come to Options and I can go down to Orthogonal Pipes. Right now, direct pipes, meaning a direct connection from each node. I'm going to go to orthogonal pipes and it'll do something like this. It's a little cleaner when you have a lot of nodes in your node tree. So it's really a preference thing, but I'm going to stick with this for now. Okay, so let's get going. First thing that we're going to do is I want to change this background to black. If anybody knows how to do this, maybe there's an option I'm missing somewhere. I know in the standalone version of Fusion you could change the checkerboard pattern to black. I have not found that option yet. So if you know, please let me know. It would be a huge help because every time I got to do something sort of like this. So let's grab a background node. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to delete this connection here by double clicking. I'm going to grab the outputs of these two. I'm going to put them together, and that's going to generate a merge node, and that merge node I'm going to bring into my media out. I'm going to change the title up here to follow, and I'm going to pick a font called Top Secret. This is a font that I've downloaded. I put a link in the description below for that if you want that font. Okay, right now we still see we don't have any text showing up. That's probably because I have my inputs flipped. So this green node here is the foreground. I actually want this background to be connected to the yellow one, which is the background. So I can disconnect those and rewire things, or I can come here and I can right click on this and I can go swap inputs or Control T. And there we go. All good now. So I got my follow set up. I'm just going to move this up to the top of the screen here. So as far as the follower is concerned, it is a very non-intuitive tool. In fact, anytime there's any modifiers involved, which is what we're going to be doing, we're going to be applying a modifier, which is this grayed out section here, onto our existing text plus node. It's very easy to get lost. There's not really a visual roadmap as there is in this node editor. It would be nice if there was a nodal representation of what we're about to do, but as far as I know, there's not, so we have to go through this somewhat clunky interface, and it's very easy to have something not work without a simple explanation why. I've certainly done all the wrong things in preparing for this tutorial, and it's very easy to get confused, and there's a lot of bugs that you can hit along the way. So we'll try to keep this as clean and as simple as possible, and in order to do that, I want to talk in terms of levels. So there's going to be three main levels we're going to be kind of working at. Level 1 will be our text plus node over here. That's sort of our top level. Level 2 is when we add a follow modifier, and we're going to get into that in a second. And then level 3 is going to be some more details within the follow modifier that we're going to get to. So I'm going to be referring to those three levels quite a bit here. First of all, how do you add a follower modifier to a text plus? So you come up to your styled text here and you're going to right click on it, and then you're going to get all these options here, and followers is one of the options that we're going to choose. I just want to go through a few things on the interface specifically regarding these keyframe icons here. So let's say we wanted to keyframe the text. So let's say at frame 0 I want follow to show up. Then I'm going to go up to frame 10 and I'm going to change that to follower. It's a little bit off the screen, but that's okay for our purposes here. So that's been set up as a keyframe. So now if I play this, we're at frame 0. As we get to frame 10, we see that switch to follower. Let me just pull this yellow bar in here, just, oops, this yellow bar in here, just so we're showing only the first 40 frames, let's say. It'll just loop after that. So we see it switches from follow to follower. Now you'll notice since I set this up as a keyframe and I right click on the styled text, these items do not show up. So it looks like you cannot set up keyframe animation on changing the text at the same time as adding a follower. And the reason I bring this up is because this icon over here can be a little bit confusing because it's kind of doing double duty. In this case, it's showing you that it's red, so that means we're keyframing on this. It has this little arrow over here, and if I bring up the spline editor, what that's essentially saying is there's another keyframe over to the right of it. There's nothing to the left. If I were to move this slider in the middle, this turns gray, meaning there's no keyframe or control point at the specific frame, but there is one to the left and there is one to the right, and I can go and jump on those if I want. Now, if I want to get rid of these keyframes, I can right click here and I can go remove text plus styled text, and that gets rid of everything there. And now if I right click in styled text, I can now add a follower. Before I add a follower, keep an eye on that icon there. So it's going to turn red, and it kind of makes sense, I guess, because we're going to be keyframing within the follower, so I guess I can buy that. If you were to come and click on this, if you thought you could do any keyframing as you move your slider around, so say I came up to frame 30 and I wanted to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to put a keyframe here. When you click on that, you're actually going to delete your modifier. So I'm going to do that again here. So I right click, I add a follower, and then you'll notice up here, I can now select this, where this was grayed out before. If I click on this, now that's grayed out again. I have no modifier attached. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, in any case though, we're talking about follower modifier today, so let's get into that. I'm going to add a follow modifier. Now, I've opened up what I'm going to refer to as level 2. So remember, level 1, what I'm saying is our text plus node at the top. Then our modifier, when I click on this modifiers, this follower 1 is level 2. That's what's been created. So we're one level down now. Now we're going to get to all these in a second, but what I want to do first of all is I want to set up an animation. And what I'm going to do on an animation is I'm going to do a rotate animation. What we're going to do is we're going to rotate each of these letters into place one by one. Before we set that up though, I just want to give a big word of warning here that these items here are pretty much the same ones that you're going to see if you click back on tools. There's a lot of commonality there. It's very easy to get mixed up if you think you're in modifiers and you're really doing something on tools and then something doesn't work properly, or vice versa. It's very easy to get confused, and that's why I'm really hammering the point home that we're working in terms of levels here. So let's go into level 2, which is our follower. We're going to go into a transform here, and we're going to open up rotation. Now, here's a really interesting thing about how the follower modifier works. I can take any of these controls here and I can move them around and absolutely nothing is going to happen. That is until I set a keyframe. So if you want to do any global changes, you got to go back up to level 1 where you can move the tracking, for example, and that'll instantly have an effect. I'm going to undo that, go back into level 2, which is our follow modifier, and I want to rotate Y. So I'm going to click a keyframe here, and that's brought up our hierarchy here. So we see our text plus, which is our level 1, then we're down into our follower here, and inside of the follower we have what we want to change. This is not the level 3 that I'm talking about. I'll get into that in a second. Okay, so what we want to do, let's go to frame 0. We're keyframing Y here. So I'm going to set this to, double click in there, I'm going to set this to 90 degrees. And what we're going to do is by frame 30, which I'm going to jump over to now, that's going to be set to 0 degrees. So let's just center this. I'm going to play this animation here. And there we go. So that's pretty nice. We see it sort of spin into place. Just going to make things a little bit smoother just by selecting these two nodes here, pushing S. And there we go. All right, very quickly, one thing I'm going to add is opacity to this. Now here's where things get pretty confusing and where you can really get lost here. So this is where I'm going to talk about level 3, which is when you click on this shading here. Under shading elements, you have you have 8 potential shading elements you can select from. And for those of you that are not familiar with these, you can use these shading elements and customize them however you want. You can add drop shadows, you can add outlines, whatever you really want to do. And it does get tricky here because I have these shading elements here under modifiers. I also have shading elements under tools, which is my top level. I have another shading elements here. So if I want to turn on a shading element, say I wanted to turn on outlines, I select item number 2, I click on enable, and we see the red outlines appear. I'm just going to give us a little bit more space here. We see the red outlines appear. But for now, we're going to turn this off. We're going to come back to this in a second because there's a really important point that I want to make about this. But let's just do one thing at a time here. So I want to go into modifiers, level 2. So I'm in my modifier, my follower modifier. And what I'm calling level 3 is whatever one we have selected here, because there's 8 different ones. So right now we're on this first one here. So any changes that we do in here only affect element number 1 and not 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm going to show you why that is important in a little bit. But for now, I also want to key on this opacity here. So we're going to let these letters fade in. So let's take our opacity here. I'm going to click on this as a keyframe. So let's go zoom to fit here. And we see I've set up a keyframe on frame 37 where it's going to be full opacity here. And I'm going to come back to frame 0. And I am going to create another keyframe there. And I'm going to take the opacity down. And I'm going to control select these 2 nodes, push S just to smooth those out. So let's see what we have now. So there we go, that's nice. Okay, but what about the actual following? Everything's happening here at the same time. Yep, now is where we get down to the business here. So we're going to go back to, so again, we're under our modifiers here, so we're in level 2 now, and we're going to come back to timing. Now what we want to set up here is a delay that we can set up between when each of these animations happen. So let's go through these one by one. First, there's a range. I want all characters. If you were to select character range, you could pick only 2 through 5 or something like that. Notice it's indexed to 0, so F would be a 0, not a 1. In any case, we go back to all characters. We'll take a look at this order after because it's better to show you live. And we can set up our delay, which is down here. We're going to be setting up this delay either between each character or between the first and the last character. So what does that mean? So we have it set up a delay between each character. I'm going to set this to 5 frames. So what that means, if I come back to my 0th frame here, now right now at my 0th frame everything's black because my opacity is down to 0. So I've gone inside my follower, so that's level 2. Select element number 1, which is my level 3, and then I'm just going to take opacity up and put it at 1 just for now. So what I want to show you here is, so if we go back to our follower and we click on timing, we have 5 seconds between each character. So I'm going to use my right arrow key just to step through frames. So I'm on 0 right now, and take a look here as I click through those, that this one's going to start moving, and then 5 frames later this one is going to start rotating. So here we go. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now on the 6th you'll watch the O move. Here we go. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now on the 11th, the first L is going to start moving. 3, 4, and so on and so on and so on. So it's 5 frames between the animations of each of these characters here. If you think about how the follower is working, we're setting up an animation on some element that's defined up here. Because we set our range to be all characters and our order is left to right, that means the very first character is what we're essentially animating, and everything else after that, as defined by the order and everything here, will follow by some delay. So if we play this here, we can play with the order. We can go right to left and that'll work backwards. We can go inside out. We can go outside in where it's working on the outside letters first, inside out, and so on and so on. So you can play around with these here, but we're going to stick with left to right for now. So the next thing that we want to do is modify the positions. You might start with everything pulled off the screen so things kind of slot into place, but for now I'm just going to start up here and I'm going to end the animation down at the bottom half of the screen just to help visualize what's going on. So we have our follower selected, so we're in level 2 right now. I'm going to select shading here because that's where the position is located. It would be nice to have something global as far as position, but we don't have that option. It's inside each of these elements, and that's why I'm really bringing this level 3 into play. Whatever we're doing here is not going to apply to element number 2. So I'm actually going to turn on element number 2 later, and we're going to see what you have to do to make that kind of sync up. Okay, so let's open up the position here, and on position, what I want to do is there's a video link up top that explains the difference between displacement and XY coordinates. So I'd recommend checking that out if what I'm about to do is unfamiliar to you. I want to change the Y offset. That's going to drop these letters down to the bottom half of the screen. So in order to do that, I need to set a keyframe on this, but if I were just to click the keyframe now, it would set it up in terms of displacement, which to me is not as intuitive. So I'm going to right click on offset over here. I'm going to go modify width. I'm going to go XY path. That there is going to set up a separate XY coordinate that I can play with. So we're back at frame 0, so that's good. And I have a keyframe set up there, and it's I'm going to turn off the X because we only want to look at the Y. So the Y is green, so that's the one at the bottom here. So I'm going to take these here and I'm just going to disable these. And so the only thing with the check mark on is the Y here. So I'll move up to frame 30. Now you'll notice here if you look up the X and the Y, those are both set up to be keyframed. So I'm going to use the Y and I'm going to bring it down right about there to the bottom of the screen. I'm going to scale to fit there. I'm going to grab these points here. So I always do and smooth these out a little bit. There we go. So let's play it. Let's see what we have now. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let's say now I wanted to put an effect on this, like a drop shadow or something. So again, I'm in the modifiers level here. I have my follower up here, so I can double click on this. If I come down into here and I click enable, that's not going to do anything. I have to go back up to my top level, level 1, which is tools, which is my text node, go into my shading elements here, and then click on enabled, which brings up this, by default, it's set to a red outline. I'm going to change that to a light gray or something like that. And now, of course, you see things have gone horribly wrong. Unless this is what you're looking for, of course. That's kind of a neat effect anyway. But we notice that the outlines are not dropping down with the rest of the letters. But these outlines are spinning in. Let's turn the opacity back down. So purple here is my opacity, so I'm going to select that node. I'm going to change that to 0. So now, when I run the animation, you see a couple things here. So the solid letters are fading in, dropping down, and spinning, whereas the outlines are only spinning, and that's because of this hierarchy that we have set up. The rotation is done, if I go into the modifiers, the rotation is done on a transform, which is rotating the Y right here. So that applies to every element in this shading element, drop down here. However, when we did the position change, as well as the opacity change, that was specific to element number 1. So what I'm going to show you now is how to bring those over to element number 2. So for example, let's take the position change and get that to match up. So in my tools, top level, level 1, I've enabled the red outline, which I've changed to the white, but that's okay. So I could change this to gray, I suppose. And again, this is where I'll do my global changes, but if I want to do anything to do with this follow animation, I have to go inside the modifiers here, select my follower, I'm going to select element number 2, and I want to set up keyframes on both opacity as well as the position. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to click on opacity. I'm not going to set any values right now. I'm just going to set that up for keyframing. Then I'm going to come down to position here, and I'm going to do the same thing. Right click on the offset, modify width, XY path. And if I come down and look at my node editor now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been added here. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and we're going to look at just the values for opacity, for example. So I'm going to turn everything else off except for opacity. And I'm going to do a zoom to fit here. So now we see we have 2 lines here. Let me change this color of this new opacity here. So I click on this color here. I'll take this orange, and there we go. So our new opacity value is up here. We want to take the values of this spline here and copy them over to this one here. To do that, it's very simple. We just right click here on our source spline, which is our purple one. Right click, copy. Then we go to our destination, right click, paste settings. And there we go, the 2 overlap now. It even copied over the color. So let me just change this back to orange or red or whatever that is. So if I turn off this original opacity, there we go. We have the values that have been copied over. If we play our animation, Take a look at the F. Now you can see the opacity come in. So now we have to do the same thing with the Y. So now our outline is coming down with the characters. Let me just change that outline color to back to red just to demonstrate a little bit better. And then when something like this is set up, really it's anything goes. If we wanted to take our outline and have that delayed a little bit, I would lock this Y value here, and remember the Y is our the solid part of our letter. So now what I can select is these two nodes here, which is this Y control here. I can grab these. I'm just going to shift, move them over a little bit, and that'll just give this sort of a little bit of a delay kind of thing here. I'm just going to expand our animation a little bit. There we go. And that red is a little bit too much. Going to change that back to a white or something like that. Now there is one bug that I have been coming across that didn't unfortunately happen during this demo here, but sometimes when you're running these animations you'll see a little bit of a hitch. You'll see one of the letters kind of pop up and wiggle around, like it doesn't really follow things smoothly. To do that, what I've found you can do to get around that is if you come back to your tools up to your top level, click back on text, you can just put whatever your text is, just temporarily put a space in, and you can even delete that space afterwards. I'm not really sure what's going on behind the scenes, but it kind of gives something a little bit of a kick and gets things going again. So that's just something that I found can work from time to time. So to recap, top level changes on your Text Plus node are under this Tools selection here. You go down one level into Modifiers and select your follower. And as long as you're doing changes in this text or in this transform, those will apply to everything. If you come into the shading element here, then you'll have to set each of those animations up separately. So thanks so much for checking this out. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye now.